Trump's Oval Office address, Iran war, nuclear deal, and America's exit. 2 to 3 weeks. That is the timeline the President of the United States has just put on America's war with Iran. Donald Trump, speaking from the Oval Office, Muscat declared that Iran has no navy, no military, no air force, no telecommunications, and no leaders. He says the war is nearly won. He says Iran is begging for a deal. But tonight, the questions being asked by analysts, allies, and the American public are far more complicated than that. Good evening. President Donald Trump has just concluded a wide-ranging and extraordinary Oval Office address covering the Iran war, nuclear weapons, regime change, drone threats, birthright citizenship, and the Supreme Court. BBC correspondent Rosalind Jordan has been monitoring every development from Washington. Here is the complete picture, broken down in full. 2 to 3 weeks. Trump sets a war timeline. In what analysts are describing as the most significant statement made by any American president since this conflict began, Donald Trump told reporters gathered in the Oval Office that the United States will be, in his words, done with the war in Iran within 2 to 3 weeks. This is the first time a specific and concrete timeline has been publicly attached to the end of this conflict by the Commander-in-Chief himself. It is worth noting the context. When the war began on February the 28th, President Trump indicated the campaign would last 4 to 6 weeks. Tonight's statement represents a compression of that original estimate, suggesting either that military objectives are being achieved faster than anticipated or that political pressure at home is accelerating the administration's desire to declare victory and withdraw. BBC correspondent Rosalind Jordan in Washington confirmed this was the first time such a specific number of weeks had been stated publicly and directly by the president himself. They have no navy, no military, no nothing. Speaking with extraordinary confidence, some would say extraordinary bluntness, President Trump outlined what he described as the total and comprehensive destruction of Iran's military capacity. His precise words left little room for ambiguity. Iran, he said, has no navy, it has no military, it has no air force, it has no telecommunications infrastructure, it has no anti-aircraft systems, and critically, it has no leaders. The president attributed that final point to what he described as regime change, a development he was careful to clarify was never one of his stated goals. His singular objective, he insisted, was always one thing and one thing only: to ensure that Iran would never possess a nuclear weapon. That goal, he declared, has now been achieved. Iranian aircraft, he added, are roaming Iranian skies entirely unopposed because, in his assessment, there is simply nothing left capable of shooting them down. These are remarkable claims that independent analysts are already examining with considerable scrutiny. Nuclear weapons, the central objective. At the very heart of tonight's Oval Office address was a single, definitive claim from the President of the United States: Iran will not have nuclear weapons. Trump stated this not as an aspiration or a negotiating position, but as a fait accompli, a done deal already achieved by the military campaign currently underway. He went further, projecting into the future with characteristic confidence, arguing that even if Iran were to rebuild its infrastructure over the coming 15 to 20 years, a future American president modeled on his own approach would simply repeat the military campaign all over again. What was notably absent from the president's remarks, and what BBC correspondent Rosalind Jordan immediately flagged as a critical, outstanding question, was any mention of Iran's existing stockpile of processed uranium. Reports indicate Iran holds approximately 600 kilograms of uranium, enriched to around 60%, dangerously close to weapons grade. What happens to that material remains entirely unaddressed and deeply consequential. Deal or no deal, the contradictions. Perhaps the most analytically confusing element of tonight's presidential address was the apparent contradiction at its core. On one hand, President Trump stated clearly and directly that Iran does not need to make a deal with the United States for American forces to leave. The condition he set was not a signed agreement, but rather a subjective military assessment that Iran has been, in his words, put into the Stone Ages and rendered incapable of producing a nuclear weapon. On the other hand, the president also acknowledged that negotiations are actively taking place, and that Iran wants to make a deal more than he does, He also raised the possibility of targeting Iranian bridges as additional leverage, while simultaneously leaving open the door to an early exit if Tehran comes to the negotiating table. Rosalind Jordan summarized the contradiction precisely. If no deal is required, why are negotiations happening at all? It is, she said, a genuinely confusing picture emerging from this administration tonight. The new Iranian regime, Trump's unexpected pivot. In a moment that caught many observers by surprise, President Trump spoke with measured, if cautious, approval about what he described as Iran's new regime. Regime change, he reiterated, was never his goal. Yet he acknowledged that it has happened, and he appeared willing to engage with the new leadership in a manner that would have been unthinkable with the previous one. He described the new Iranian regime as significantly more accessible, recounting what appeared to be early diplomatic contact in which Iranian officials expressed respect and a desire to engage. Trump said the new leadership is much better than what came before. This is a striking and significant shift in tone from a president who spent much of this conflict describing Iranian leadership in the most extreme terms. Whether this represents a genuine diplomatic opening or simply a narrative designed to provide political cover for a military withdrawal remains a matter of considerable debate among regional analysts and foreign policy experts. The Strait of Hormuz, America's retreat from the region. Turning to the question of what happens after American forces leave, President Trump offered a remarkably candid assessment of the United States' future role, or lack thereof, in protecting international shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz. The president was direct. America knocked out what he described as radicalized elements along the strait, but the ongoing policing of those waters is not, in his view, America's responsibility. He suggested that nations whose ships use those trade routes, including France and other European states, should take responsibility for their own protection. This represents a potential seismic shift in the post-war security architecture of one of the world's most strategically vital waterways, through which a significant portion of global oil supplies pass daily. The president noted that he had already heard reports of large numbers of commercial ships sailing through the strait today, citing this as evidence that the mission had been accomplished and America's work was effectively done. Drone threats, America's new anti-drone capabilities. The press conference took an unexpected turn when a reporter raised the subject of drone swarms that have recently been observed over sensitive American military installations, including a reported incident at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where drones hovered over the flight line for several hours. The president was notably unbothered. He dismissed suggestions that the drones might represent a foreign military threat, pointing instead to what he described as America's unbelievable anti-drone weaponry, including laser systems he described with visible enthusiasm as capable of melting drones in midair. He noted that in the past 4 or 5 days, drone incidents had decreased significantly, attributing this directly to the deployment of these new defensive systems. He also addressed a viral video showing U.S. Army helicopters hovering near musician Kid Rock's home in Nashville, acknowledging it was probably inappropriate behavior, while suggesting the crew simply liked Kid Rock. Several crew members have since been suspended. Birthright citizenship and the Supreme Court. In a significant domestic policy development woven into tonight's wide-ranging press conference, President Trump confirmed that he intends to attend Supreme Court proceedings tomorrow as the court hears arguments regarding his executive order targeting birthright citizenship. Trump offered an extended and impassioned historical argument, contending that the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship provisions were written specifically and exclusively to protect the children of formerly enslaved people following the Civil War, and were never intended to apply to the children of foreign nationals, including, as he put it, billionaires who travel to America specifically to secure citizenship for their children. He accused legal professionals of having badly mishandled this constitutional question for decades. He was sharply critical of justices appointed by Democratic presidents, arguing that regardless of the strength of any case before them, those justices would rule against his administration. He expressed considerably more confidence in Republican-appointed justices while acknowledging that some have ruled against him in the past. The political pressure, why Trump wants out. Beyond the military claims and the diplomatic contradictions, BBC correspondent Rosalind Jordan offered a clear-eyed assessment of the domestic political forces driving tonight's presidential address. The Iran war, she noted, is deeply and increasingly unpopular with the American public, and particularly with the independent voters who will determine the outcome of this year's midterm elections. Inflation has returned. Official figures suggest it is now running above 4%. A gallon of regular unleaded fuel in the United States has crossed $4, a psychologically and politically significant threshold that American voters have historically used as a direct barometer of their own economic well-being. When fuel prices rise, the party in power suffers. The president is acutely aware of this dynamic, according to reporting from the past 24 hours. The desire to conclude this conflict within the next 2 to 3 weeks is driven as much by electoral calculation as by military achievement. The war's popularity is gone, and with midterms approaching, time is running out. Iran's uranium stockpile, the unanswered question. As the dust settles on tonight's extraordinary Oval Office address, the single most consequential question raised, and left entirely unanswered, is the fate of Iran's existing uranium stockpile. Rosalind Jordan, speaking from Washington, was precise and unambiguous on this point. Iran is reported to hold approximately 600 kilograms of uranium enriched to approximately 60% purity, a level dangerously close to the 90% threshold required for weapons-grade nuclear material. The president tonight declared his singular war objective achieved. Iran will not have nuclear weapons, but nowhere in his remarks did he address what happens to those 600 kilograms. Is it secured? Is it destroyed? Is it being negotiated over in the back-channel talks he referenced? No reporter in the room raised the question. No administration official volunteered an answer. And yet it is arguably the most important detail in the entire Iran nuclear equation, because without resolving it, the president's central claim of mission accomplished rests on deeply uncertain foundations. So tonight the picture from Washington is this. A president who says the war is nearly won, a timeline of 2 to 3 weeks, a new Iranian regime he is cautiously willing to engage with, and a nuclear stockpile nobody is talking about. Whether this is the beginning of a genuine endgame or a politically motivated rush to the exit before midterm elections is the question every analyst, every ally, and every American voter is now asking. Thank you for watching. This story is moving fast, and we will be covering every development as it unfolds. If this breakdown was useful, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to understand what is happening. Stay informed, stay engaged. We will be back with full updates very soon. Good night.